Along the rocky shores of Newfoundland, the sea once carried the rhythm of paddles. Light canoes skimmed across the water, their frames slender, their paddles stained with red ochre. The Beothuk painted everything with it, their bodies, their tools, their shelters. To the outsiders, it was striking. To the Beothuk, it was sacred. Ochre was more than just a color. It was a protection, identity, spirit. It turned every canoe, every figure, every handprint into a living connection with the land and the ancestors. For centuries, they lived with the rhythm of the seasons. Caribou in winter, salmon in summer, berries gathered under the green canopy, fires glowing on the shoreline. They were a people of balance, taking what the land gave, giving back in ritual and memory. Their world was harsh, but it was theirs, bound together by red earth, by water and by silence that spoke more than just words. But today, the silence is different. The canoe are gone. The ochre has faded from the rocks. Their camps and hunting trails have vanished into the forest and snow. All that remains are fragments, tools unearthed from soil, ochre-stained bones in the earth, and the memory of a woman who tried to keep her people alive in drawings when words were no longer enough. The Beothuk did not leave monuments of stone or palaces of gold. They left something even quieter and far more fragile. The echo of lives lived close to the land, painted in red, now remembered in absence. And the red remembers. Before foreign sails cut across their horizon, the Beothuk lived in rhythm with Newfoundland's raw, untamed land. Their world was one of sharp edges and constant changes. Winters locked in ice and hunger. Summers bursting with salmon runs and green forests. The interior gave caribou, the river gave fish, and the coast gave seals and seabirds. Each season had its gift. In winter, families followed the caribou herds inland, building shelters lined with furs against the bitter cold. The hunt was not only survival, but it was a ceremony. Bones and sinews were used with care. Nothing was wasted, everything was respected. In spring, they returned to river, where salmon leapt from the current in silver flashes. Canoes glided through the water, their light frames stitched from breech and skin, paddles cutting waves in silence. By summer, they flashed the bays and gathered berries, storing what they could for the leaner months ahead. Every act was a survival, but every act was also a memory, and binding it all was red ochre. To outsiders, it might have seemed like a paint, but to the Beothuk, it was life itself. They stained their skin, their canoes, their weapons, even the walls of their shelters. The hunter smeared ochre across his face before leaving for the caribou trails. A mother painted her child's body in red before a journey, marking them as belongings to the family, to the spirit, to the ancestors. When the dead was laid to rest, ochre covered them too. So even in silence, they remained bound to the living. Around the fires, stories passed from elder to child. Tales of how the world was shaped, of spirits in the river, of ancestors who still walked through the red glow of ochre. The drumbeat rose, steady as a heartbeat, carrying chants into the night. Children watched the flames dance against the ochre-painted walls, and knew they were part of something older, something enduring. This was the Beothuk, before outsiders came, a people shaped by harsh winter, a generous summer, by caribou and salmon, by river and sea, a people who marked every moment with sacred earth beneath their feet, a people whose silence was not absence but a balance. The Beothuk's horizon was never empty. They knew the sea, its moods, its gifts. But one day, sails appeared, first fleeting, then returning, then refusing to leave. Centuries earlier, Norse voyagers may have touched these coasts. Their sagas tell of Vinland, of forest and fish-rich rivers. Whether those encounters happened or not, they passed like shadows. The Beothuk continued in their rhythm, untouched, but by 1500s, a new ship came from across the ocean. Portugal, France, England. They were not passing shadows. They came with nets, iron, and hunger for the endless cod that filled the water of Newfoundland. At first, the Beothuk stayed away. They moved quietly, watching the pale men building camps on beaches and pull thousands of fish from the sea. The strangers left iron nails, hooks, and tools, things the Beothuk could use. They returned each summer, then more frequently, until the coastline that had always been Beothuk hunting and fishing grounds grew crowded with outsiders. From the forest's edge, a Beothuk hunter might have seen the sail for the first time. White wings rising against the grey sea. From the shoreline, children might have whispered as they saw foreigners walking where their fire once burned. A mother, her hands streaked with ochre, might have led her children inland, painting their skin not just as a tradition but as a protection as well. The Beothuk avoided confrontation. Silence was their first weapon. They slipped inland where Europeans came near, reclaimed abandoned nets after the camp were gone, and kept to themselves. But silence could not hold back the tide. Every year, the ship returned. Every year, more wood was cut, more rivers fished, more land claimed. What the Beothuk saw was sacred balance. Europeans saw as wealth to be taken, cod pulled from the sea in endless numbers. Forests turned to lumber, bays filled with camps and fire. The world that had always belonged to Beothuk was being reshaped by people who did not understand its spirit. First contact was not marked by a single battle or treaty. It was marked by distance that slowly turned into loss. By the end of the 16th century, the Beothuk's world was already shrinking. The silence that once meant peace was becoming retreat. The retreat would soon turn into disappearance. The Beothuk once thrived where the river met the sea. But as the ship returned each summer, the coast, their lifeline, began to close. The Beothuk once thrived where the river met the sea. But as the ships returned each summer, the coast, their lifeline, began to close. To avoid these foreigners, the Beothuk moved inland. They gave up the bays where they once fished for salmon, by the beaches where they had hunted seals, the harbors where their canoes once cut across the water. In retreat, they lost more than just grounds. They lost access to food that had sustained them for generations. Starvation began to whisper through their camps. Without salmon, winter was very hard. Without seal, hunger grew even sharper. They hunted caribou, trapped small game, and gathered what they could. But the balance was already broken. Every year, survival cost more. Every year, fewer children see springs. And now, conflict was unavoidable. Europeans, now building permanent settlements, saw the Beothuk not as a neighbor, but as obstacles. Tools and goods once scavenged became reasons for raid. Misunderstandings turned to violence. Guns against arrows. Settlers against families who only wanted to live as they always had. And of course, disease carried the final blow. Smallpox, measles, and tuberculosis. illness brought by foreigners spread quickly among a people with no immunity to these diseases. Even those who escaped violence could not escape sickness. Villages that once held dozens dwindled to handful. Some were abandoned entirely, left silent except for the wind through the empty shelters. Imagine the scene: a family walking inland, their canoe left behind on the shore, painted in ochre, but never to touch the sea again. A child asks why they cannot return, why the salmons are gone. A mother, silent, dips her head into the pouch of red earth and paints the children's face one more time, not as a promise, but as a protection, as a memory. By the late 17th century, the Beothuk were being pushed into the shadows of their own homeland. They survived in smaller groups, hidden from the coast that had once fed them. Every step inland was a step into the silence. The red still marked their skin, but their world was bleeding away. By the 18th century, the Beothuk was no longer a people spread across the land. They were fragments, scattered families fighting against the time. Where once 1,000 moved between coasts and rivers, now only dozens remained. The silence they had chosen to survive had become the silence of their disappearance. Settlers spoke of seeing only faint signs: a red-stained canoe sliding across a distant lake at dusk. A smoke trail vanished as quickly as it rose from the forest. Abandoned camps, their shelters half collapsed, ochre still clinging faintly to the wood. The Beothuk were here, always just beyond the sight, surviving in shadows of a homeland that was no longer theirs. Hunger tightened around them. Starvation was not sudden but slow. Winters stretched longer. Summers offered less. Caribou herds thinned. Salmon runs dwindled. And the coast remained close to them. Violence added to the weight. Raids, reprisals, skirmishes, where arrows faced guns. And behind it all, disease swept silently, taking lives without a weapon raised. Smallpox, measles, sickness against where these bodies had no defense at all. By the early 1800s, the Beothuk had become a memory in their own time. Villages once alive with song and ochre had fallen quiet, where fire once lit the night sky. And then came the last voice, Shenandoah, captured in 1823, lived her final years among Europeans. She was not only a survival, she became the witness for a people who could no longer speak for themselves. In the stillness of her last days, she drew with fragile lines on scraps of paper. She sketched hunting camps, canoes, rituals, map of river her people once walked. Each drawing was not just memory, it was defiance. Proof that Beothuk had lived, had loved, had believed. Proof that silence could not erase anything. When Shenandoah died in 1829, the Beothuk were declared extinct. Her passing was more than the end of life. It was the final breath of a culture that had endured for centuries. But even as the last of her people was laid to rest, fragments remained, ochre-stained tools in the soil, bones still red in the earth, her sketches preserved in glass. The Beothuk were gone, yet in silence they left a trace that could not be erased. The Beothuk are gone, their canoes no longer touch the sea, their songs no longer rise over the rivers. Their fires no longer glow against the night. But disappearance is not the same as erasure. The ochre still remembers. Artifacts lifted from the soil are still stained red, as if carrying the heartbeat of those who painted them. Shenandoah's drawing remain, fragile sketches on paper, yet powerful enough to keep a culture alive in memory. Oral histories among neighboring indigenous people recall the Beothuk, ensuring that silence never became absolute. Their story is not only a tragedy, it's a testimony. The Beothuk reminds us how fragile human cultures can be when faced with intrusion, violence, and loss, but also reminds us of resilience, that even when people are pushed to silence, They still leave marks that speak across time. A canoe paddle, a line of ochre, a drawing made by a last survivor. These are voices that endured. The Beothuk did not build great monuments of stone or cities of gold. Their legacy is smaller, quieter, but no less profound. It teaches us that memory is not measured by size, but by meaning. The red earth they carried on their skin still tell us they were here, they belonged, they mattered. And so, though the Beothuk no longer walk the Newfoundland's shore, they are not lost entirely. They are present in silence, in fragments, in the red that clings to the earth. Thank you for watching CTT Stories. The Beothuk may no longer walk the shores of the Newfoundland, but their silence is not empty. If this story touched you, share it so their memory carries further. And in the comments, write "The Red Remembers," a tribute to a people who painted their lives in ochre and refused to be forgotten. Subscribe for more stories carved from time. Stay curious, stay human, and remember, some voices fall silent, but the earth still remembers. And I'll see you in the next one.